Do you have questions about your employment rights? Ask a Lawyer is here for you. Each week, experts from employmentlawyer.ca answer your questions. Visit cp24.com/askalawyer and watch Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on CP24.
If you've ever had a question about your employment law rights, then you've come to the right place. Welcome to Ask a Lawyer. I'm your host, Dana Levinson. Each week, we dive into different employment-related topics that are on many Canadians' minds. I'd like to welcome my guest for today, Lior Samfiru, partner at Samfiru Tumarkin LLP. Before we get to our latest round of emails and phone calls, Lior, tell us why it's important everyone knows about their employment rights and maybe a significant case you could talk about from this past week.
Well, Dana, we all work and we all have rights, and employment law touches us all, and it touches us very often because sometimes when we're at work, we'll have questions about, well, my job is changing, can that happen? Or my boss said, this is the situation, is that right? I get these types of questions all the time, and getting all these questions, I realize that there has to be a better way to reach people so that we can inform and educate kind of the masses about their rights, about their entitlements when it comes to employment law. It's very important. I think it's a very basic, fundamental right that we have, which is to understand the law, in the workplace. And that's what this show is all about, to educate you and to give you an avenue you can go to if you are facing a workplace problem. So by all means, if you're dealing with a workplace issue, we'll give you my contact information a number of times throughout the show, and you can reach out. But let me give you an example of a case that came across my desk just over the past number of days where I think there's some important lessons to be learned. I spoke with a lady who, about 3 months prior, was put on a performance improvement plan. And for those that don't know what that is, a performance improvement plan is a mechanism that an employer uses when they feel that the employee is not doing a good job or meeting some standards to try to get them to improve their performance and get them to where they need to be. So this person tried her best, but according to her employer, after 3 months, her performance did not improve significantly. So she was let go. Now, her employer said to her, well, we put you on a performance improvement plan. That was your heads up, if you will. And you didn't improve your performance, so now we can let you go, and we're going to let you go for cause because we give you that opportunity to improve, and that means we're not going to have to pay you any severance. So, of course, she called me, and really her question was, can they do this? I get that asked often. Can my employer do this? So here's the thing. Her performance may not have been exactly where her employer wanted it to be. But she was not deliberately harming her employer. She wasn't deliberately not trying or slacking off when she should be working. She was doing her best and she was improving. Maybe her employer was not satisfied with her rate of improvement. That all does not amount to cause for dismissal. Remember, to let someone go for cause, i.e. without severance, that is a very high threshold. The employee would have to be guilty of the type of misconduct that just makes it impossible to continue employing them. And not doing the job necessarily right away to the level that the employer wants is not that. So even though the fact that they let her go in and of itself is not illegal, what makes it illegal, what makes it a wrongful dismissal, is that they try to avoid paying her severance. She is owed severance. And even after a year of working there, she's probably owed as much as 4 months of severance. So an important reminder there for employees, even if you're on a performance improvement plan, that does not mean you can be let go without severance. The other reminder that I'll say when it comes to performance improvement plans, if you don't agree with it, if you don't think it's legitimate, if you think the facts that your employer alleges are not correct, say so in writing. By doing that, you're protecting yourself. And of course, if you are let go, if you're not sure what to do, you can always give me a call.
Okay, if you want to get in touch with Lior and his team, you can call 1-888-861-4555, email ask@employmentlawyer.ca, or visit their website, employmentlawyer.ca. Let's kick things off by taking our first call, Lior. These calls come from your radio shows across Ontario and Canada, where you take questions live from listeners. So let's take a listen.
I was employed for almost 5 years, a little over 50. They terminated me. I had no notice, and when I asked them what the reason was, specifically, they said, you're just not a right fit. It was just gone. That's it. Is that basically it? They just say you're not a right fit as a standard wording they just use now?
No, I understand completely that for employees, it's very frustrating to be let go and not be given a reason and not be told why or just be given some vague comment like, well, you're not the right fit. What does that even mean? So that may be wrong from an ethical standpoint, from a business standpoint, but it's not necessarily wrong from a legal standpoint. Because your employer is allowed to let you go for no reason or for an indeterminate reason, as long as they pay you proper severance. They don't even have to give a reason. So I understand that's upsetting, and a good employer should give you some respect and talk to you about why they're letting you go. But from a legal standpoint, as long as they pay proper severance, they've met their legal obligations. So for this person whose question we just heard, the real question is, how much severance is he owed, and did his employer pay him that severance? So rather than me just tell you automatically how much severance he's owed, let me show you how you can find out how much severance you're owed and he's owed. We're going to go to pocketemploymentlawyer.ca. We're going to use our severance calculator there, which, by the way, is completely free and completely anonymous. And let's plug that information and let's see how much severance this person is actually owed. So we know that he's in his mid-50s, 55 years old, been there for 4 years. We can see that he's owed somewhere between 8 to 9 months of severance. Now, that's true regardless of the reason he was let go. Maybe he's the right fit, maybe he's not the right fit. He still owed that severance, and that is the key number. If he got that severance, his employer did this right and legally. If he did not get that severance, that is a wrongful dismissal. So always the focus. That's why we talk about severance so often on this show, is because from a legal standpoint, if you lose your job, it's mostly about that severance.
Okay, let's take a short break. When we come back, employment lawyer Lior Samfiru from employmentlawyer.ca will discuss rights for older workers. Stay with us.
Do you have questions about your employment rights? Ask a Lawyer is here for you. Each week, experts from employmentlawyer.ca answer your questions. Visit cp24.com/askalawyer and watch Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on CP24.
Welcome back to Ask a Lawyer. Employment lawyer Lior Samfiru from employmentlawyer.ca is answering questions about your workplace rights. If you want to get in touch with Lior and his team, you can call 1-888-861-4555, email ask@employmentlawyer.ca, or visit their website, employmentlawyer.ca. We have lots more calls and emails coming up, but Lior, before jumping into those calls, I want to talk about today's main topic, and that's rights of older employees in an aging workforce. So let's start off with some of the most frequently asked questions. Number one, can an employer fire an older employee because of their age?
The answer to that is an unequivocal no. Absolutely not. You cannot be let go because of your age, but I'm going to go a step further than that. It's not even legal if your age formed part of the decision to let you go. Maybe it wasn't the only reason, but it was part of the reason. That is also illegal. Under our human rights legislation, and that's true across Canada, age cannot ever be a factor about your hiring, your firing, your discipline, your promotion. Age should not be a factor. We used to have mandatory retirement. That went away many years ago, some 16, 17 years ago. So right now, you have a right to work as long as you want to. It's your decision, whether in your 60s, 70s, or older. You can work and you cannot be let go. And if an employer tries to let you go because of your age, well, I want to bring younger blood. Well, that's very nice and good. You can't do that. That's illegal. That's a human rights violation, and the law does not take kindly to employers that do that.
Okay, next question. What are employers' options if an older employee is becoming less productive? Can they discipline or fire them?
Well, the flip side to what I just said is an employer certainly is allowed to have employees that do a good job. You know, an employer has the right to make sure that their employees perform to the proper standard. And if an employer all of a sudden has employees that can't do their job, then they have to deal with that. But an employer can't just discipline someone just because. If you have an older employee and all of a sudden you realize that they're having a more difficult time keeping up, talk to that employee and find out, is there a medical issue? Is there another issue? Is there accommodation that can be given? If you're simply going to say to that older employee, hey, you're getting older, you can't do the job the way you used to, so we're going to penalize you, that's a human rights violation. You can't do that. So if you know that that employee is struggling, ask the question, find out how to work with them. Now, if there's no medical issue, if there's no physical issue, the employee is just not working hard, well, yeah, absolutely you can discipline that employee, but be very careful. You don't want to be on the wrong side of a human rights complaint.
Okay, so the flip side of that, should an older employee talk to their boss if they find that they're struggling at their job?
Absolutely. If you know that whether it's your age or your medical condition is preventing you from doing your job to the best of your ability, tell your employer. Ideally, you want to even give them something from your doctor if it's a medical issue. By doing that, you're putting the onus on your employer to accommodate you. You're going to prevent them being able to legally let you go. They're not going to be able to say, hey, we didn't know. So have that discussion with your employer. By the way, I always want you to put that in writing as well so that your employer can't deny that you've ever talked to them about it. But definitely, it's not a good idea to just ignore the issue and hope your employer won't notice. Be open and upfront with your employer about any medical restrictions, whether it's related to age or otherwise. Very important.
So can an employer suggest to an older employee that they resign from their job?
And I've seen this happen. And a couple of years ago, I had a client whose boss left a brochure on their desk about a retirement home. Hint, hint, maybe you should take that option and consider retiring. Doing something like that and suggesting to an employee that they should retire or maybe it's time for you to move on, I think it's demeaning, it's disrespectful, and it's not appropriate. And an employer that does that creates that situation for an employee is going to be also guilty of potentially human rights violation. That could also be a constructive dismissal. An employee shouldn't have to go to work and being pushed to retire. So employers, don't do that. Let your employees work as long as they want to. It's okay to ask them, hey, what are your plans? Because I want to plan, accordingly, but not to push them to retire, not to suggest to them that their time has come to leave. That is wrong and it's illegal.
How is severance pay calculated for older individuals?
So remember, one of the three main factors that go into calculating severance is the person's age. The older you are, the more severance you are owed. So if you're an older employee, and by older I mean someone that's 60 or older, that you're let go, you're going to be owed much more severance than if you were younger than that. So that's why it's so important to get advice, because your severance could be substantially more than you realize. If you're a 3-year employee at the age of 65, you're going to get a lot more severance than if you were a 3-year employee at the age of 35. So the older you are, the more severance you get.
Okay, let's get to more of your questions. Here's another caller from your radio show. Take a listen.
I work for a food company. When I signed on with the company, I signed a non-compete. If I resign, I'll give my 2 weeks and go to another company. Can they stop me from working? Or if they let me go and I go to another company, can they stop me working?
So Dana, with respect to non-competes, except for very senior employees, executives, except for those individuals, non-competes are generally not enforceable. Our courts have said that we do not like terms that prevent people from earning a living. That was reinforced recently by the Ontario government implementing legislation that makes non-compete clauses unenforceable if they were entered into after October of 2021. Now, all that said, even though you may have signed a non-compete that's completely unenforceable, it's not worth the paper it's written on, that does not mean you can just ignore it. Because if you sign a non-compete, what happens if your employer tries to enforce it? They'll take legal action against you. And yes, you will win that legal action, but it's still going to be a very miserable experience. And I've seen that happen time and time again. So my best advice, if you have a non-compete, talk to your employer. See if you can rationalize with them and say, listen, employer, I'm not going to steal your business. I'm not going to hurt you, but I want to be able to work somewhere else. In many cases, you can reach an agreement with your employer that everyone can live with, but simply ignoring the non-compete is risky. By the way, if you're not sure if it's enforceable, if it's not, and how you should deal with it, always happy to chat with you.
Okay, after the break, we'll hear from someone facing a slash in pay and the rules about overtime pay for salaried workers. Stay with us.
Do you have questions about your employment rights? Ask a Lawyer is here for you. Each week, experts from employmentlawyer.ca answer your questions. Visit cp24.com/askalawyer and watch Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on CP24.
Welcome back to Ask a Lawyer. Lior Samfiru from employmentlawyer.ca is taking questions about your workplace rights. If you want to get in touch with Lior and his team, you can call 1-888-861-4555, email ask@employmentlawyer.ca, or visit their website, employmentlawyer.ca. We still have lots more to discuss. Here's another call that came into your radio show recently. Let's take a listen.
Out of the blue, I was approached by my employer that I'd worked with for the last 4.5 years with totally change of our contract terms. He expected me to sign right away, and reducing my pay rate, the way it was structured, it was going to be substantially less. Am I entitled to any compensation? Like if I refuse, and he says, well, get lost, right? My average income would have been 55 to 75. I'm 63.
Lior?
So he knows already that it's bad to sign this because it's a pay cut. And I can assure you, not even having seen this employment agreement, there are other terms in it that could be equally as bad, maybe even worse than that $20,000 pay reduction. So he's absolutely right. He should not sign it. Why would he agree to change his terms in such a negative way? So if he doesn't sign it, one of two things will happen. Either his employer will back off and say, fine, we'll leave you be. Maybe I'm optimistic, but that's a possibility. The second option is the company may decide to let him go. They can do that, but they'd have to pay him his full severance based on his current salary. So that he can make an informed decision, he also needs to know how much severance he would be owed in this situation. So let's talk about how much severance he'd be owed. And we're going to go back to our handy dandy tool, the Pocket Employment Lawyer, and use our severance calculator, which, by the way, you can do at home as well. So when you go to Pocket Employment Lawyer, use our severance calculator. Let's do that for this person. He's been there for 4 years. He's 63 years old. We know he's making a salary of $75,000. He's owed right around 8, potentially 9 or 10 months of severance. So somewhere north of 8 months severance is what he's owed. So that's what's at stake for him. And remember, his employer can't just decide to change terms of employment unilaterally. That's also a dismissal. It's a constructive dismissal. So you do have the ability to stand up for your rights and insist that your employer doesn't take away things that are yours.
Okay, we have an email from Charlie that's sent to ask@employmentlawyer.ca. I'm a salaried worker who constantly works extra hours, often putting in 12-hour days. Whenever I inquire about overtime, my boss tells me it's just something they don't do. Is he right?
They don't do. Well, isn't that nice that they get to decide what laws apply to them? And we talked about misconceptions at the beginning of the show. And one of the most common misconceptions is that overtime is not paid if you're on a fixed salary. It's maybe just for hourly employees. Well, let's be very clear. You absolutely get overtime if you are on a salary, and it's not your employer's decision. Now, in Ontario, for most people, overtime is paid at time and a half if you work more than 44 hours a week. So how does that work for salaried employees? It's very simple. Whatever your weekly salary is, we divide that by 44. That gives us an hourly rate. 1.5 times that is your overtime rate. So your employer has to pay you if you work more than 44 hours a week, unless you're in an exempt position. For example, managers are exempt from overtime. Certain professionals like doctors, lawyers, accountants are exempt. But unless you're in an exempt position, your employer has to pay that overtime, and they don't get to say, well, we've decided that's just not our policy. It doesn't work that way.
Okay, let's take another break. When we come back, Lior Samfiru, partner at employmentlawyer.ca, is clearing through myths about multiple fixed-term contracts and dishonest reasons employers get to let people go.
Do you have questions about your employment rights? Ask a Lawyer is here for you. Each week, experts from employmentlawyer.ca answer your questions. Visit cp24.com/askalawyer and watch Wednesdays at 9:30 p.m. on CP24.
Welcome back to Ask a Lawyer. Lior Samfiru from employmentlawyer.ca is answering your employment law questions. You can connect with his team by calling 1-888-861-4555, email ask@employmentlawyer.ca, or visit their website, employmentlawyer.ca. We have time for a few more emails. Here's one from Wilson. After working for a company over 6 annual contracts, my boss decided not to renew my contract. No explanation or severance was given, and she said she was well within her right to do that. Do I have options here?
So here's what happens when you sign multiple fixed-term contracts. It's a contract for a year, then you sign another one and another one. Usually, once we go beyond 3, okay, once we go beyond 3, we're considered to be a regular indefinite employee. So you may have signed 5, 6, 10 contracts. The law would consider you now to be an indefinite hire. And why is that important? It's important because if at some point the company says, now we're not renewing, now you're gone, well, because you're an indefinite employee, they have to pay you severance. So that contract really stops having any meaning once we go beyond 3. So I know a lot of people, teachers at private schools often sign a contract every year. Meaningless. More than 3, you're a regular indefinite employee.
That's great information. David sent this email to ask@employmentlawyer.ca. I was just let go from a job in the tech industry after 10 years. I was told it was due to the economy, but they just hired 3 new people. I even took a 20% pay cut last year to help out. Can they do that?
Obviously, this is an employer that's being less than honest. Yeah. Clearly, okay? They're not being honest about the reasons. But as wrong as that is, and we've always been told honesty is the best policy, and I think that's correct. But from a legal standpoint, an employer does not have to give a reason to let you go. So this employer, by letting them go and giving them a false reason and clearly lying, is not actually doing something illegal. The real question is, did he get the severance that he is owed? Because if he didn't, that's a wrongful dismissal. So the focus has to be on severance, on the compensation that he's owed, not so much the reason. The company does get some leeway to have a good reason, bad reason, or no reason, but they have to pay severance.
Lior, thank you so much for being here today. You can catch legal experts from employmentlawyer.ca on Ask a Lawyer every Wednesday on CP24. For more information on this show at employmentlawyer.ca, visit cp24.com/askalawyer. Join us again next week as we take a look at the 5 things you need to do when you lose your job. Thanks for watching.